Tolkien Road Podcast, Episode 20, The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's Foreword. All right, go ahead. The Tolkien Road, 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 Hi everyone, John Carswell here. Welcome to the Tolkien Road Podcast, your conversational guide to Middle-earth and the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. On this episode of the podcast, we begin our discussion of The Lord of the Rings by examining Tolkien's Foreword to the second edition. This is an important section because in it, Tolkien discusses his reasons for writing the book. We'll also discuss just what he means when he says that The Lord of the Rings is a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. Please leave us a rating and feedback on iTunes. We'd love to know what you think of the Tolkien Road. Enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Tolkien Road podcast. How you doing? This is our 20th episode.
Is it really?
Yeah, 20th episode.
Wow.
Yeah, I can remember way back when we were only on 10 episodes. And we thought that was just amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So good for us and good for you for continuing to listen.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And on this 20th episode, we are stepping away for a little while from the Silmarillion. On the last episode we finished up with Chapter 9, The Flight of the Noldor, and by the way, just so you know, they're not actually flying, like they're not like flying elves. Just FYI, in case you were wondering about that.
I don't think you need to insult our listeners.
Yeah. Well, no, they might think that's kind of weird, or think like, oh, I want to go read that chapter. Flying elves sound cool.
No, people know. People that are this far in the Silmarillion, they'll know that flight is just a cool word for fleeing.
Okay, this is look who's the Silmarillion expert now.
I'm just saying. I'm just trying to stick up for our listeners. That's all.
They could be flying on eagles, right? They could be riding eagles.
Except eagles haven't come into play yet.
Manwë.
Manwë's an eagle?
No, he's not an eagle, but he's the lord of the eagles, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, tonight we're going to be taking a step away. You shouldn't get into these arguments with me. I always want to.
Careful what you say.
Yeah, so...
never say always.
So we're going to be stepping away from the Silmarillion for a little while. We will be coming back before too long. But, I was just, for a little while now, I've been kind of jonesing to include some Hobbits in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hobbits are pretty awesome.
And, as much as I do really love the Silmarillion, this is my third or fourth time reading through it. It is very heavy, and heavy not only in terms of being dense with information, but also heavy in terms of there's not much in terms of in the way of comic relief or anything like that.
Right. It's a little draining.
It is, and it's just like tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy. Very few bright moments.
Yes.
Very few bright moments.
Yes.
So we are taking a step away from the Silmarillion for a little while, and we're going to start reading The Lord of the Rings. And we won't go all the way through The Lord of the Rings, at least I don't think we will, before we go back to the Silmarillion and read some more of that. But now I feel like we've kind of set the stage. We reached a natural stopping point in the Silmarillion to take a break from that, and we're going to hit The Lord of the Rings and have some fun reading The Lord of the Rings. And we will be doing On Fairy Stories at some point soon, probably within the next few episodes, because I think it helps to read that early on in the process of reading The Lord of the Rings.
All right.
There's a lot of important stuff in there. But we're going to start off tonight with the foreword to the second edition, which Tolkien wrote, I think, somewhere in the... Let's see, does it actually say?
It mentions this 10 years...
I think he wrote it somewhere in the 60s. I think he wrote it at some point in the 60s.
Yeah.
So in the book was published in the early 50s, so I think he wrote it sometime in the early to mid 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So he was already getting pretty famous off of the Lord of the Rings. People were already becoming like freakishly devoted followers of his.
Even in the 60s.
Oh, yeah.
Or 50s.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It didn't take long. So, but I have to say, well, first of all, let me say this. It's good to be coming back to Lord of the Rings. This is, I think it's one of the greatest books ever written, if not the greatest book ever written. And it's just good to be coming back to it. It always feels good to be starting out. I think, I don't know, it's just such an achievement, and I'm really excited to be reading it this time and like sharing it.
Yeah.
I have taught it before to a class of high schoolers, and there's some level of appreciation there, but today, for example, we did, in my class that I teach, we did a little poll, and 75% of the class picked Harry Potter over Lord of the Rings.
Shame.
And I'm just like pulling my hair out, and
not that there's anything wrong with Harry Potter. I do love Harry Potter.
I get it, and I do enjoy
genre,
Harry Potter as well. But for me, it's like Harry Potter's like, oh, that was nice, and that was an enjoyable read.
Right, it's not
I like
lasting.
The movies.
It's not.
Lord of the Rings is like changed my life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I read that, and it's just like, this is the book. Like this is the greatest thing ever. And I get it, because it's a hard book to start. It starts out, I'll be the first to admit that I did not read The Lord of the Rings. I did not read The Fellowship of the Ring until I had seen the Peter Jackson film.
Really?
Yeah. I think I started it, and it was tough. You're you're trying to figure out who everybody is, and especially because I think it had been a long time since I'd read The Hobbit. So it's just there's a lot packed into it, even early on, and it's not light reading by any means.
No.
But it's one of those things where once you get through it, and you kind of get on a roll with it, it just takes on this life of its own. Yeah. Pretty brilliant. So we're going to talk some about that in this foreword. It's a short little writing, only a couple of pages in my book, 4 pages, 3.5 really to be exact. But Tolkien says some important stuff in here, some good stuff in hindsight for us to keep in mind as we read. But I will say this: I think that Tolkien was secretly a fan of haiku.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Did you catch some haikus in the foreword?
Well, how about this for a haiku?
Uh-oh.
Check this out.
All right.
This little hidden haiku I just discovered.
A hidden haiku?
Yeah. Give me one moment.
I like how that sounds.
I'm pulling it up on my iPhone as I drink my Dr. Pepper. All right, so check this out.
Okay.
The Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, the Return of the King. Forms a perfect haiku.
Does it really?
Yeah.
The Fellowship
of the Ring, the Two Towers.
That's only 6. Oh, the
Return of the King.
The Return of the King. Wow.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
So obviously Tolkien was secretly trying to, implant his love of haiku in all of us.
I think that's obvious.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why we decided to start doing haiku along with this, because in the depths of our souls, it's like subliminal, It's like we were like, Tolkien was communicating to us, I love haiku. I love haiku. Obviously,
and that just shows that we are just on a different level of friendship with Tolkien.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah,
we're channeling it.
We're channeling exactly. We're channeling Tolkien.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I don't think we can claim like Tolkien's our best bud or anything like that.
No, I don't think we can. But
we probably would think he was our best bud if we met him and be like, "You're my best bud," and he'd be like, "You're weird. Get away from me."
We probably
Please leave me alone.
We probably would not have been the first people to say that to him. But I think it just I think that's pretty cool.
Right.
I think that maybe we might get Tolkien.
Mm-hmm. Maybe. I think kind of as you get more and more into his stuff, you start to, minds sync up, and that's why we're doing this podcast. Is we want to kind of craft a more Tolkien-esque existence for ourselves.
Yes.
We see a lot of wisdom in the man.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
That's the whole idea.
Cash in on it.
That's the whole idea. We're going to just like kind of soak it all in like osmosis. We're just breathing in everything about Tolkien.
This would be an appropriate time to share that one of the things we thought about naming the podcast was the Tolkien Tub.
Tolkien Tub, soaking in
Tolkien.
Yeah,
in the Tolkien Tub.
That's true. But I don't know. It just felt a little too profane.
A little too goofy.
A little too vulgar.
Mm-hmm.
Not in a sense of like cuss word vulgarity, but just like vulgar in the sense of kind of common. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I see what you're saying.
Just didn't feel right.
No, I agree.
So I guess I just have too kind of lofty a notion of when it comes to Tolkien.
I understand that.
So anyway, that was something I discovered. But on that note, why don't we share some haiku that we wrote ourselves?
Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling! Haiku time!
All right. So yeah, you want to go first?
Did that one that you just shared count as one?
No.
Okay. All right. Here's my first one. 13 years well spent, for in the end a great tale of hobbits is told.
13 years well spent, for in the end a great tale of hobbits is told. Nice.
Thanks.
Nice. I like it.
Thanks.
And I agree it's well spent.
Yes.
Is that how long it took you to read the books the first time? 13 years?
No.
Oh, that's how long he took to write
it. That's how long it took him to write it. If I did my math correctly.
Well, it's kind of...
He said 1936 to 1949.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But of course, it didn't come out until 1953, so it's a little longer, but... it's close enough. If that's what he said, that's what he said.
That's what I read.
Those 4 years were probably like editing,
rewriting, typing. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Here's my first one.
Okay.
Of meanings, I meant to tell a tale I wanted to enjoy myself.
Ooh, I like that. Mm-hmm.
Of meanings, I meant to tell a tale I wanted to enjoy myself.
I wanted to tell a tale that I enjoyed myself.
I meant to tell a tale I wanted to enjoy myself.
Oh, I meant to tell a tale.
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. I meant to tell. In meanings, I meant to tell a tale. That's
good. It could be to tell a tale that I would have enjoyed. Anyway, I like it the way I said it.
I like it the way you said it too.
All right,
can't remember
another
how
one?
you said it. Yep, I got one more. All right. Please be sensible. Do not read what is not there. Be free, dear reader.
I like that. That. Do not read what is not there. Be free, dear reader. I like that. I think that gets very close to the heart.
That's what I was going for, the heart.
All right, here's my other one.
Okay.
No allegory here. This tale too unwieldy, too like the real world.
Too like yeah. That's good. That's really, really good. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious what a lot of this foreword dealt with.
What's that?
I think based on our last few haikus, it's pretty obvious what a big part of the foreword dealt with.
Yes, indeed. All right, so...
We've talked about this some before, too. Right?
Yeah, we have, and it's a recurring theme with Tolkien. Mm-hmm. If you kind of have those meta Tolkien conversations, what was he doing?
Yes.
He's not a fan of allegory, but we're going to talk. Let's just kind of go through the foreword here and see what we got.
Let's do it.
So, he starts out and he basically says when he got done writing The Hobbit in 1937, he quickly started writing the sequel and got a little of the way into it. But it didn't last. It wasn't long until he was like, you know what? I'm not really feeling this sequel right now. Yeah. I'm going to go back and write the history of the Elder Days, right? So this is basically what became the Silmarillion, right?
Right.
Mythology and legends of the Elder Days. He says, I desired to do this for my own satisfaction, and I had little hope that other people would be interested in this work, especially since it was primarily, for all the reasons we know.
Yeah.
And then I like what he says. He was like, with those whose advice and opinion I sought corrected, when those whose advice and opinion I sought corrected little hope to no hope,
Yes.
I went back to the sequel, right? So he's like, I basically shared the Silmarillion with some people, including my publisher, and like no one was just like, dude, can we just get another Hobbit here?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Can we just get another funny story, funny little fairy tale about, furry little creatures that become heroes?
Right.
Instead of this, like, strange ancient mythology that you've created with, that is just really hard to understand and get into. So I like that. I like the fact that, and really forever, for his whole life, he wanted the Silmarillion to be published.
Right.
And it's almost like he started writing this stuff in the hopes that maybe he could get enough traction that the Silmarillion would eventually be published. It's just a little bit of a bummer to me that it was never published in his lifetime.
Yeah.
Even though I probably think he probably knew by the time he died that it would eventually be published. It's still, it would have been cool, for him to have been around when it was actually published.
Yeah.
But of course it may never have been finished because I think it was he needed to be perfect. He needed the Silmarillion to be perfect for him to be happy with it.
Right.
Right,
yeah.
But what I really find interesting about the second paragraph here is that he basically says that because he went back after writing The Hobbit, which was more of this like fairy tale and much of it even oriented to like a more childlike audience, and something he kind of regretted later on about the way he wrote it. But he basically went from that to writing the Silmarillion, and then when it came time to come back to the new Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings eventually, he found himself giving all of this background, like almost synthesizing the two styles, right? Like basically taking the style of the Hobbit, or kind of the narrative that had begun with the Hobbit, and giving it more of a Silmarillion-like backdrop, right? Giving it a much, like using all that history and working it in there.
See, like
Right?
infusing
Yeah.
the Silmarillion into the new Hobbit.
Exactly.
Okay.
He says, but the story was drawn irresistibly towards the older world and became an account, as it were, of its end and passing away before its beginning and middle had been told. The process had begun in the writing of The Hobbit, in which there was already some references to the older material, or to the older matter. Elrond, Gondolin, the High Elves, and the Orcs, as well as glimpses that had arisen unbidden of things higher or deeper or darker than its surface. Durin, Moria, Gandalf, the Necromancer, the Ring. The discovery of the significance of these glimpses and of their relation to the ancient histories revealed the Third Age and its culmination in the War of the Ring. So, he realized that, what he could do, or maybe even unintentionally, unconsciously, he just started working in, this much vaster scope for the sequel to The Hobbit. There was going to be a lot more at stake,
right,
in this,
right, and
consequently, he felt freer, I think, to bring in a lot more background. I think that's why The Lord of the Rings can feel so hard to get started on if you've never read it. It was really helpful. I think that's why seeing the film helped me to kind of entice me to want to read it, because now I had a framework for the narrative. And so all of the stuff, then you can appreciate all of the other stuff that goes into it. All of the stuff at first that seems really extraneous. And that's one of the huge reasons that I love this book so much, is because it takes its time. It doesn't. You don't feel like it's almost like you can take your time to really feel like this is a real world. And you remember what we haven't really read. We haven't read on fairy stories yet, so we haven't covered this in much depth. But that whole concept of creating kind of this secondary reality, this work that seemed to have its own reality, was very important to him. I mean, you can see that in Leaf by Niggle.
Oh yeah.
Which we did read several episodes ago and discuss. He talks about spending all this time on just the detail of a leaf, right?
Yes.
And that it eventually takes on this whole work kind of takes on a life of its own. But this is Tolkien's Leaf, right? I mean, this is, and he said as much, if you recall, right? This is his Leaf by Niggle, right?
Yes.
His work that he started and was like, you know what? I'm going to do this the way I want to do it. which means that I'm gonna look under every rock, and I'm going to explain the history of every detail, and I'm gonna make it feel like you are on this journey, like literally on a journey that feels like it's taking a long time, like a journey would, before the advent of modern transportation, right? When you're walking everywhere and you're in touch with the things that are going on around you, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that just starting right there is one of the huge reasons I love this work so much, is because you feel like you are right there walking along with him.
Yes.
Even in the movie, you don't get that sense, because they have to keep you interested. They have to kind of skip from action scene to action scene.
Right.
They try a little bit, but at the end of the day, you can't take your time as much as you can in a book, right? And
that's true.
And so they really take their time. So so he kind of outlines how far he got at different times writing it. He wrote it in spurts. He would write for a while, and then he'd get to a certain spot, and then he'd stop for a year, and then he'd come back to it, and he'd write a whole bunch more, and then stop for another year or however long. And then finally around 1944, so this is 8 years after he really started it, he finds himself tackling the journey of Frodo to Mordor, right? Which comes in the Two Towers and the Return of the King.
So I found this kind of interesting. It sounds like, maybe I just misread this, but the way I interpreted what I read was that he didn't necessarily write it chronologically. Right? I mean, he didn't write it. It's not like he sat down and wrote from book 1 to the end.
Right.
Right? I mean, it says here he wrote book 3, and then he wrote book 5, then he came back and wrote book 4, and is that right?
And yeah, but that's how, you may not recall this from when you read it, because I know it's been a long time for you, but
yeah, it has been.
That's how the book, there's sort of a central narrative through the Fellowship of the Ring, and then at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, the Fellowship breaks apart, and you end up with 2, and at some points 3 different sort of interrelated narratives going on, right?
Right.
And so in book 3, it focuses on Aragorn and Gandalf and Merry and Pippin and Legolas and Gimli, and book 4 focuses on Frodo and Sam.
I see.
Right?
Yes. Okay.
Because they've all broken apart at that point. So it would make sense that actually he wrote book 3 and book 5 kind of together, because book 5 again,
narratives
that goes together. That sort of forms one narrative.
I see.
And then book 4 and then book 6, the first part of book 6 at least forms its own thing.
Okay,
so,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, I was reading through some different letters, and if you don't have the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, I'll post a link to it on to where you can go and get them on the website, on the show notes. But because it's an awesome, I love this. I love the letters of Tolkien. There's so much great stuff in here, and I'm trying to work as much of it as I can into the podcast. But it's really funny. In letter 139 to Rayner Unwin, who is now, when he's writing this letter, it's just before The Lord of the Rings is about to come out, and Rayner Unwin is now the grown man who, when he wrote The Hobbit, when Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, was a kid and read it, and like the son of the publisher, right?
I see.
Who was one of the first kids to read it, and was like, oh, I like this book, So he's had this friendship with Tolkien since growing up and everything, and but what I thought really funny was he gives the original planned names for the 3 books, and they were book 1, instead of The Fellowship of the Ring, it was The Return of the Shadow. Which actually I kind of like. I think that would have been a cool title too. The Return of the Shadow. Yeah. Book 2, The Shadow Lengthens. And then book 3 was The Return of the King. And I just have to say that I'm extremely glad that book 2 is not named The Shadow Lengthens. Because I think that would have been like a kind of, like, I can't take that name seriously. I don't know. It's like, I don't know. It just feels like it just doesn't have that same gravity to me. It's like The Return of the Shadow, and now the shadow's lengthening, and now the shadow's getting longer, and it doesn't feel right to me. I think the Two Towers was a brilliant name, and he talks about that in letter 140, why he eventually chose the Two Towers instead of the Shadow Lengthens. But I just think it's funny that the Two Towers was almost called the Shadow Lengthens. The shadow. I'm either thinking of the shadow lengthens or the shadow gets longer, or the shadow elongates.
Or the shadow grows longer as the sun goes higher in the sky.
Right. So, they just came out with the name of, well, not just, but several months ago now, but they came out with the name of the new Star Wars movie. And it's called The Force Awakens. And I have to admit that when I heard that, I thought of the Shadow Lengthens.
The Shadow Lengthens.
And I was like, I'm not too... Now, the more I've kind of come to grips with that name, and I don't hate it as much as I did at first. But I think they could have done better, honestly, but that's fine. I think it's kind of silly to say that this impersonal force is awakening. To me, something needs to have more of a sense of being of having a personhood to awaken, and for it to feel like it's an appropriate thing to say. That's a rabbit trail. Yes. Anyway, the Shadow Lengthens. So glad it's not called the Shadow Lengthens. Glad it's called the Two Towers. I think that's a much more fitting name. So anyway, but what I liked about Tolkien talking about his process here, he says on page Roman numeral XIV, he says, then when the end had at last been reached, the whole story had to be revised, and indeed largely rewritten backwards. And it had to be typed and retyped by me. The cost of professional typing by the 10-fingered was beyond my means. Yes. And I wondered what he meant by that at first, and I was like, oh, he's one of those guys that type like this.
He's a pecker, right?
Yeah. He does one. Yeah, he's got his two pointer fingers, and he's like, I just picture Tolkien later, like confound this contraption, like.
And something this long, oh my goodness, I can't imagine how long that took.
It's like 500 or 600,000 words.
Oh my goodness.
It's insane. Yeah, wow. So...
and think about, Tolkien not being able to afford a typist. I'm like, really?
I know.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's pause there for a commercial break, and we will come back to finish the rest of the foreword. We shall be right back.
Don't go away.
Don't go away. Do you know the tale that Tolkien called the kernel of the Middle-earth mythology? Beren and Luthien is the story of an outlaw mortal and an elvish princess tasked with obtaining a Silmaril, one of the holy jewels of the Blessed Realm, from the Iron Crown of the Dark Lord Morgoth. In my new book, Tolkien's Requiem, I explore the legend of these doomed lovers. In doing so, I aim to provide a backdoor into the world of the Silmarillion for those who have struggled to give it a go. One of Tolkien's greatest achievements, the story of Beren and Luthien, deserves to be as well known as The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Get your copy of Tolkien's Requiem today by visiting truemyths.org/Beren. That's truemyths.org/BEREN. Happy reading! Okay, we're back. So, picking up. And we're in the foreword, and he talks about The Lord of the Rings has been read by many people since it finally appeared in print, and he wants to say something about why he wrote it, because Tolkien's bane for his entire life was people trying to, and you see this all over his letters, was people trying to say like, oh, I know why you wrote this. Orcs are really communists, aren't they? And he was no, like an orc is an orc.
Right.
Oh, I see why you wrote this. The ring, it's really the atomic bomb, isn't it? And he's like, no, stop it. He says, the prime motive was the desire of a tale-teller to try his hand at a really long story that would hold the attention of readers, amuse them, delight them, and at times maybe excite them or deeply move them. Right? Mm-hmm. He just wanted to tell a good story. Right? And a story that he would be proud of.
Right, and he wanted to serve the greater good.
Yeah,
right, by giving people something enjoyable to
escape. See, I don't even like throwing in "serve the greater good" in there, because I think that makes it sound like, oh, I'm going to write a story that will serve the greater good.
No, what I'm saying is,
I think he just wanted to write an awesome story.
But he says right here he wanted to write a story that would amuse people, that would delight them, that would maybe excite them and deeply move them.
Yeah. No, I'm saying that's all good stuff, but I don't find in there anything about the greater good, is all I'm saying.
Well, that was just my way of putting the fact that he wasn't like, he just didn't want to tell a story. He wanted to tell a story that people would like. Right,
an awesome story. Yes. That's my point, right? Not something with his altruistic other motive, right?
No, that's not what I was trying to say.
The problem I have, and I could be just attributing things to what you said, but...
Yes, you are.
Well, but I'm going to go with it.
Okay. Fine.
Yes, I am. So, the problem with saying something like, for the greater good, is that, like, that's not it, because that makes it sound like he disliked allegory because he felt like it was the type of thing that somebody would write for the greater good, right? I'm writing the story to communicate these principles and the way people should live their lives, you know? Whereas Tolkien, for the fact that he's a fantasy writer and wrote fairy tales, he was going for something more like realism, you know? He's not trying to make something that is going to teach people lessons and all of that kind of thing. He's going for something that feels real, you know?
Right.
And that people can lose themselves in and immerse themselves in.
Right.
We'll get into all that and on fairy stories.
I wasn't saying serve the greater good as in, here, let me teach you how to live your life.
Yeah.
What I was saying was serve the greater good in giving them something fun to do with their time.
Right.
Right? To give them something, like a world to escape into, to forget their daily cares.
Yeah.
Right? And just become a part of Middle-earth and to walk along the road with Frodo and Sam.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, is another way of serving the greater good. Is by giving people something to enjoy. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, tell it to the judge.
I will.
All right. Yeah, so... and so he says, basically, I was kind of my own guide in this process of writing a story that I felt would be all of these things. And sometimes, you can't... Basically, he says, like, you can't please everybody. Right?
Especially in a long story.
Right. But he also, Tolkien was notoriously did not, like, he was an academic, but he did not really feel much kinship with most academics of his time. Right? And he says that when he says, some who have read the book, or at any rate have reviewed it, have found it boring, absurd, or contemptible. And I have no cause to complain, since I have similar opinions of their works, or of the kinds of writing that they evidently prefer. So I like that, because it's a little jab back at him.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, that's okay. I find what they write boring, extremely boring too, Exactly. And I kind of love that, because the poetic justice of the fact that, like, oh, I'm writing for the New York Times, and I'm the book reviewer for the New York Times, and I'm going to give you a bad review. And then it's like, Tolkien's like, but I've sold 200 million books, right? Like, sorry. And I wrote something awesome, right? Mm-hmm. I wrote something that people, like, cry over, and like this is the greatest thing ever. Plus, I sold a lot of them, more than, like, anybody ever.
Right. And plus, if you're going to say that you really like this book that I hate, I don't want you to like my book anyway.
And you wrote a book that maybe got a good review in the New York Times, but, like, it sold 200 copies, you know?
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I love that. And because I do feel like that so often, like, Tolkien gets shunned by the literary establishment so often, and that's happening less and less. But even, I'll admit, even when I went to write my own master's thesis about Tolkien, and I decided I was going to write it about Tolkien, I was a little scared to go and tell people. I went to a school with a very open-minded English department, thankfully. So I didn't get any, like, weird looks or any, like, let's talk about that before you go down that road, okay? I didn't get any of that, right? It was like, oh, great. Yeah, we can do that. Here's the person you should talk to about it. Mm-hmm. And it was very supportive. But, like, I imagine that there's other schools where that would not have happened, where it would have been like, why don't you write something about this thing that only, like, sold 50 copies, and, that would probably be better. Like that would have made the process of writing the thesis so painful.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so glad that I got to write about Tolkien.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I love the fact that here's this little veiled jab and back at him in a very British style, right? Mm-hmm. And
isn't that the great thing about the Brits?
I know.
They can like totally insult you, but sound so nice.
Sound
so
very polite doing it
while they're doing it.
Yeah.
They don't even realize they're insulting you until you're like, wait a second.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's too late.
Right. Well, and he says, the most critical reader of all, myself, now finds many defects, minor and major. But being fortunately under no obligation either to review the book or to write it again, he will pass over those in silence, except one that has been noted by others. The book is too short. I love it. I'm like, oh man, I was like, man, I wish you would have made this book twice as long, like, or 3 times as long. Like, go back and do it. And I wish he had in his life. You know, I read somewhere, and I gotta mark this as a reference because I've mentioned it more than once, but that he wanted to go back and rewrite The Hobbit in more of a Lord of the Rings style. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, oh, I wish he'd been able to do that, you know, in his life. But I think he was realizing that he was just getting too old, and he was like, this will never get done in my lifetime.
So why start?
He actually did start a sequel to The Lord of the Rings as well.
Oh, did he really?
But it never got very far because I think he kind of realized, like, there's not much more I can say about this. Like, it's going to be extremely dark if I tell that story, and I don't think it's going to be nearly as enjoyable.
Let's quit while I'm ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So, and all of his fans are just like, don't quit, please, you know. Yeah. All right. So I wanted to read. So he goes back in the next paragraph. He goes back to the issue of motives and meanings and messages and all of that. So I wanted to read. I wanted to read part of a letter he wrote to Father Robert Murray, who was a Jesuit, who was like kind of an old family friend. And this was shortly after the publication, or maybe just before the publication of The Lord of the Rings, and Father Murray had received the typescript and had sent comments and criticism, and he had written back, and he had basically said, what is it? He wrote that the book left him with a strong sense of a positive compatibility with the Order of Grace, and compared the image of Galadriel to that of the Virgin Mary. He doubted whether many critics would be able to make much of the book. They will not have a pigeonhole neatly labeled for it. And so Tolkien writes back to him, and I'll just read a little excerpt that I find interesting. I think I know exactly what you mean by the Order of Grace, and of course by your references to Our Lady, upon which all my own small perceptions of beauty, both in majesty and simplicity, is founded. The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. Unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. That is why I have not put in or have cut out practically all references to anything like religion, to cults or practices in the imaginary world. For the religious element is absorbed into the story and the symbolism. However, that is very clumsily put and sounds more self-important than I feel. For as a matter of fact, I have consciously planned very little, and should chiefly be grateful for having been brought up since I was 8 in a faith that has nourished me and taught me all the little that I know, and that I owe to my mother, who clung to her conversion and died young, largely through the hardships of a poverty resulting from it. So he says that The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. How can something be unconsciously Catholic in the writing, but consciously in the revision? Like, how can it be, you know, fundamentally Catholic and religious, not consciously in the writing, but consciously in the revision? Because this gets to that whole question of meaning, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think?
So when you say revision, you mean when he went back, right. And revised it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't know.
You got any thoughts on how it might?
So he says it was unconsciously
right,
religious and Catholic.
He says
the first writing, and then consciously in the revision.
Right. He says the Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. I mean, I think what I take away from that is that when he was writing it, he was just writing the story. He was writing what seemed like he should write, like he felt like he should write.
He was just following
He's following his muse, right? Then he goes back and he looks at it and he realizes how there's all of this symbolism built into it, right? That he didn't he didn't write and was like, oh, I'm going to create this character who's going to represent faith, the virtue of faith, or something like that, right?
Or this character that represents Our Lady.
Right. Yeah, with Galadriel, he was not trying to create a character that was just like the Virgin Mary, right?
Right.
In fact, in other places, he talks about how Galadriel is not like the Virgin Mary, right? In another letter. But, I think that's important I think that's an important statement because I think it really helps us understand how Tolkien viewed his own work. He would not argue against the notion that things were symbolic of other things. It's just he was not heavy-handed and like he wasn't forcing it on you, right?
Right. Yes.
He was more, and so that having been said, let's look at the rest of the foreword here. I think we're going to understand better what he means. As for any inner meaning or message, it has in the intention of the author none. It is neither allegorical nor topical, right? He's not giving it a message. He's not trying to inject a message into it and say, here's what I mean by this. The famous counterpoint to that is the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe comes off very much as a allegory of the gospel. He's really telling the story of the gospel in a different way. Right?
Yes.
Whereas in The Lord of the Rings, there might be strong parallels in certain ways, but that doesn't mean that that's the story. He's telling a veiled version of that story.
Right.
As the story grew, it put down roots into the past and threw out unexpected branches, but its main theme was settled from the outset by the inevitable choice of the ring as the link between it and the Hobbit. And the crucial chapter, The Shadow of the Past, is one of the oldest parts of the tale. But here's the important thing, because people often thought, because of the time he wrote it, that he was writing this as like this parable or allegory of World War II. Right? Yeah. And he deals here with that notion. He basically says, the crucial chapter, The Shadow of the Past, is one of the oldest parts of the tale. It was written long before the foreshadow of 1939 had yet become a threat of inevitable disaster. He started writing The Shadow of the Past. This is one of those things he wrote in the late 30s. That's before World War II started.
Right, I see.
Right?
Yep. And he even says that the story would have developed the same way, even if we hadn't gone to war.
Right. Well, he says not just that, he says, I can tell you exactly, if I wanted to do that, here's how the story should have gone. Right? He says, the real war does not resemble the legendary war in its process or its conclusion. If it had inspired or directed the development of the legend, then certainly the ring would have been seized and used against Sauron. He would not have been annihilated but enslaved, and Barad-dûr would not have been destroyed but occupied. Saruman, failing to get possession of the ring, would in the confusion and treacheries of the time have found in Mordor the missing links in his own researches into ring lore, and before long he would have made a great ring of his own with which to challenge the self-styled ruler of Middle-earth. In that conflict, both sides would have been hobbits in hatred and contempt. They would not long have survived, even as slaves. So he basically says, if I wanted to make this just like World War II, then Saruman would have succeeded and enslaved Sauron and put all of his devices to work for him, right? Because Tolkien viewed World War II, even though he was absolutely no fan of the Nazis, he despised the Nazis, and obviously as a British citizen, he was happy that they won the war. Even so, he looked at his own society, and he was very skeptical about the victors, right, in any war, and he basically was like, what. He has another letter where he talks about dropping he expresses his horror when the atomic bomb was dropped, and he's just like, oh my gosh, what is this we're doing now, right? Yeah. And the Allies are the ones that dropped the atomic bombs, right? This incredible power. So he's basically saying that if I'd wanted to make a book like World War II, then Saruman would have gotten a hold of the ring and used it for his own purposes, right? But that's not what happened. So he eliminates that as a possibility, that he's not trying to give a meaning, right? He's trying to tell a story. I'm just telling a story here. Telling a story here, people.
But he does, though, at the same time, he does mention that, yeah, of course, like, my experiences, they can't help but influence what I'm going to write. Yeah. Right? And he can't help but be influenced by the time in which he's writing, right? What's going on in the world around him. Right. But to be influenced by experience is way different than trying to tell an allegorical tale.
Right.
And I think that's what he's trying to say. He's like, yeah, of course, I was influenced by what was going on, but I was not writing, this to this person to represent this person, and this, like it was obviously his own tale.
Right.
That was influenced by the times, but not meant to reflect.
Exactly. Well, and he says, I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations, and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. I much prefer history, true or feigned, with its varied applicability to the thought and experience of readers. That's the key, varied applicability,
yes.
right?
Yes.
I read The Lord of the Rings, and I see things that you won't see, right? And other people will see things that neither one of us will see, right?
Yes.
Because he's not interested in writing something that is forcing a meaning on you. He's interested in writing something or forcing a lesson. The better thing is to say forcing a lesson, right? Mm-hmm. He's not writing a parable. He's writing something that can be taken in different ways, right?
Right.
Now, that's not to say he's a relativist. That's not to say he's writing this from a very relativistic perspective. But he's a storyteller, and that's primarily what he's trying to do.
Right.
He's trying to tell a good, spin a good yarn. Right.
Exactly. I love how he explains it there, and in that paragraph where he says, I think that many confuse applicability with allegory, but the one resides in the freedom of the reader, while the other in the purposed domination of the author.
I love the fact that he says purposed domination.
I love that too.
What does it make you think of?
Purposed domination.
Yeah. What does that make you think of?
What does it make me think of?
Yeah.
Of a dictator.
Well, what character? What Tolkien character?
What Tolkien character?
Yeah.
Purposed domination. Sauron. Melkor.
Melkor, yeah. Right? Melkor was interested in domination, right, from the very beginning, right? He wanted to be in power over everyone, right? He wanted to dominate.
Yes.
And
puppet master.
And then what was the whole thing with the flight of the Noldor, right? Are the Valar just going to let us go and let us be free, or are they going to force us to do something, right? So the freedom, right? Freedom versus domination. You can see that same theme right there. And what he's saying, this very meta-Tolkien idea, is reflected in his own works, right? In the story of the Silmarillion itself. Yeah. Right? So, yeah, that's a great line. That whole paragraph right there is, if you're ever tempted to think that Tolkien was writing allegory, just read that and you can figure out what he was actually trying to do, right? Yeah. So he goes on and he talks about a few fallacies. So an author cannot, of course, remain wholly unaffected by his experience, but the ways in which a story germ uses the soil of experience are extremely complex, and attempts to define the process are at best guesses from evidence that is inadequate and ambiguous. I love how he explains that, because that's how I feel when I'm writing, or even like writing songs or writing stories, whatever. It's this mysterious but very organic process, it seems like, as to how things are put together creatively, right? It's more like, and I think Tolkien actually says this in one of his letters. I don't know if I can find it right off the cuff, but he basically says somewhere that, like, all of his creative stuff kind of grew out of this mess of soil, and he likens it to like a mushroom growing. You know how like mushrooms are really kind of spontaneous and strange, like they grow what were those mushrooms that we found up in the
morels?
Yeah. It's like extremely, like, to be like a mushroom agriculturalist is, I think, very challenging, because
they're very difficult to grow purposefully.
Yeah, because it's like it has to be just the right conditions. And you think about that as the mushrooms being like one of the weirder,
more persnickety.
Yeah, like one of the weirder, like stranger, like they're not plants, I guess, but
they're fungi.
Yeah, but they're not normal, right?
No. You can't cultivate them the way that you cultivate.
Exactly, that's what I'm trying to say. Is you can't cultivate them. It's not like you're just mass production, right?
Right, exactly.
I'm sure there's people who have figured out how to cultivate them by now, but the point is, I love what Tolkien says there about the ways in which a story germ uses the soil of experience are extremely complex. Mm-hmm. And even as I'm writing some of my own stories right now, I see this, the way something will start, just the germ of a story, right? An idea for a story, and the way it's kind of like taking on a life of its own in my head. And like, as I get little things down and like I write something just a little bit here and I'm like, oh, well this just, like I went through this experience today, or I had this insight into like a interaction between two people today. This would make this I could put this into my story, right? Or even like writing a song, where I'll start out with just kind of a riff or an idea, and then like I realize, all right, I'm trying to find a melody or the words, and these words just kind of, I hear them somewhere, and I'm like, okay, that could be a starting point for something all itself, right? And it just sort of develops organically in this mysterious process from there.
Right.
He says it is also false, though naturally attractive, when the lives of an author and critic have overlapped, to suppose that the movements of thought or the events of times common to both were necessarily the most powerful influences. So he's basically saying that for all those people who lived through World War II along with me and think that's what I was writing about, that don't assume that. Like, that's a bad assumption. He goes back and he likens and he says it was very similar to be caught as a youth in 1914 when World War I began to what it was like to be involved in 1939 when World War II began. They were both horrific experiences,
sure,
right, to go through that. He does talk a little bit about some experiences of his own, but they're more just like hints and distant memories.
Yes.
It fits in more with the notion of it was just part of the organic process in my own mind, the experiences, the life experiences I had to pull from, and then translate as they inspired me to do so.
Yeah.
Into this other world, right?
Yeah.
But but it's more like, I feel like the reason you do it, the reason a good artist does something, anything, is because at the end of the day they're like, that's cool, that's fitting, right? It's hard to define why, but it just resonates with you, and you're like, that's it. If you it's almost like if you've thought about it more than that, you've overthought it. You're trying too hard.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah, I do.
I'm sure, you love to cook. You could probably relate it somewhere there, because you cook in a very, like, not, like, you're not all about, like, following the recipe to a T.
No, and when I do follow recipes to a T, it doesn't come out nearly as good.
Yeah, it's like you got to taste it, and it's like, that's right. What does it lack? What's it missing? Oh, I know what it's missing, right? But you're like, you're the inner check on it, right? You're the check on it to make sure it's like, ultimately, if this doesn't taste like what I wanted it to taste like, what I envisioned it tasting like, then it's not a good sub-creation. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
And that's what I feel like when I write a song and I feel like the song is done. I'm like, that's it. Like, it's not perfect. It's not the perfect song, as if that even exists. That's what this song was when it first came into my mind, and over the process of struggling to figure out where it should go, trying different ways, and then finally, like, getting rid of tons of different things I tried, right, and whittling it down and being like, there it is, that's it right there,
right.
And it seems like it's always been there. It's kind of magical, right?
It is, and that's something I feel like that happens in a split second. Because if you have to think about it too much, then that's not it. Right. It's like as soon as you hear something, or as soon as I taste something, and you're like, yes, that's it. I mean, it's literally like a switch flips. Yeah. And it's hard when you are trying to explain your process to somebody. It's really hard to explain because it was so, it was such an organic process within yourself, within your own mind, within your own brain, right? And it's hard to share that with somebody else, right? Because it's comes so intrinsic, like it just comes from deep down. Yeah.
Well, and I think these are very sub-creative thoughts. I mean, you go back to Mythopoeia, and I feel like that was something he hinted at there, where it's like, I receive an inspiration externally, and I have to go create that thing that I glimpsed, right? You think about even the Valar, right? It's like they saw the children of Iluvatar in a vision, in a glimpse, like an inspiration, right. And then Ale went and tried to make him, right? It didn't turn out so well for him.
I wonder if when he saw the doors, if he was like, "That's it," if he was like, "Oh no."
I think he was probably like, they came to life and he was like, I need to tell Iluvatar about this. I messed up, like
he didn't
LA,
get that. He didn't get
you weren't
that
ready
split
yet.
second,
Yeah.
like, that's it moment. No, I don't think he did.
Yeah, that could be an interesting kind of little rabbit trail to go down there, but we won't go down there right now. All right, but isn't it amazing though how like Tolkien's thought is so interconnected? Like it's like he tells these stories and it's like it's the same thing going on in his creative process,
right?
Yep. But it's like he's not. It's never heavy-handed. It just feels so organic and natural. Yeah. It just feels like he's being completely true to himself the whole way.
Right. It's not forced or there's no show being put on. It's like see what you get.
Exactly. Yeah. But just the fact that it's what we get is so magnificent.
I know. He makes it look so easy or sound so easy.
But you read this and you realize it took him 13 years.
Right, exactly. Isn't that the trick, though?
Yeah.
Is to spend, it's like a hairstyle, right? That you spend a ton of time on to make it look like you didn't spend any time on it at all.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it's kind of an ironic thing,
Well, and when I go back and I think about, again, like, Tolkien there, like, two-finger typing out 600,000 words. I like think not only that, but like he's got like all of these little like scrap pieces of paper lying around. He's like, where did I put that one about the 17th draft of The Shadow of the Past? Where is that? Where he's like sorting through his papers, like either he was like extremely I don't get the impression that he was extremely organized.
No, I don't get that impression either.
I have this feeling that maybe it took a little longer because he would have to spend an hour searching for a particular draft of something that he wrote to type it out, Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. I love this because I feel like we get a real look into the sub-creative process, and and it's reassuring as someone who is creative, likes making things, trying to write songs, all of that it's always a messy process.
Yes.
It rarely ever comes off, but the check to making sure that something is the way it's supposed to be is usually the person who is primarily given to creating it, right?
Right.
Is the one who gives it that life force in the first place,
Indeed.
Anyway, yeah. So I think that's kind of the last important thing he says here. He says a little bit more about this being a new edition and the opportunity has been taken of revising it. Any other thoughts you wanted to share?
No, I don't think so. I think you did a great job of kind of running us through it.
Okay. Right on.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose next we'll be reading the prologue concerning hobbits and other matters, which a lot of stuff going on in there. This is a little less meta Tolkien, a little more... although the prologue is kind of a blend of meta Tolkien because of what he does with the story of Gollum from The Hobbit, but it's really more of like the history leading up to of hobbits and that sort of thing, so that we have a little background on them before we start the actual story. So we're getting a little more involved with hobbits in the prologue, and then we got the story itself coming up soon.
Sweet.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and I just have to say that I think I love this cover by Alan Lee. I think Alan Lee. This painting he made. You know what that is?
Something in Middle Earth.
Well, yeah.
That's all I know.
It's Rivendell, right?
Oh,
but it's like that to me is like I want to go to there, right?
Yes,
like that.
Absolutely.
That just looks
very idyllic.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I love this painting because it captures both. It captures seamlessly what Tolkien. I feel like what's so great about his work is it has a strong feeling of reality to it. It doesn't look like this fairy fantasy world, but at the same time, it has a dreamlike, fantasy-like quality to it.
Right.
Because you're like that looks like it could be somewhere on Earth, but I don't think it is anywhere on Earth.
Right.
It looks a little too... Tolkien wouldn't use the word magical, but it looks a little too enchanted, I guess you could say.
Yes. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Anyway, so I just think that's a beautiful cover and wanted to mention it. So I got the paperback version of the Fellowship, one of the paperback versions. I think these are still in print. I like these. Anyway.
It's way prettier than mine.
Yeah. I'll link to the ones I have on the podcast episode if you want to pick up a copy of that specific one.
Sounds
all right. All right. Well, so we got some more to come from the Lord of the Rings, and we'll be getting on fairy stories here before too long. And like I said in the last episode, if you got any specific topics you'd love to see us cover, just let us know.
Yeah.
All right.
Please do reach out.
And as always, please leave us a rating on iTunes. Those help get the word out more about the Tolkien Road. So.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk at you later.
Thanks, guys. Bye, y'all.
Please remember to check out truemyths.org for show notes as well as other Tolkien goodness. Also, we hope you're enjoying the podcast as much as we enjoy making it. Please leave us a rating and feedback on iTunes. On the next podcast, we will discuss the prologue to The Lord of the Rings, wherein we learn a great deal about the nature of hobbits as well as Bilbo's very important white lie. I hope you'll tune in. Thanks for listening.